Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Lync 2013 Conferencing. In this video presentation, we're going to provide an overview of conferencing inside of Lync Server 2013. We're going to start the presentation off with an overview of the different modes of conferencing and some of the features supported by them. We're going to be looking at web conferencing, audio-video conferencing, and let's not forget our Dialin conferencing. At the end of the presentation, we're going to see a demonstration on how to configure conferencing through our Topology builder, through the control panel, and through the Lync Server Management shell. With Microsoft Lync Server 2013, the unified communications platform, it offers a rich set of conferencing modes that are going to be available to our end users at Rock Fitness. Once the conferencing is completely deployed on our network, the end users will be able to use various forms of communication for conferences. We have instant message conferencing, audio and video conferencing. We also have web conferencing, which provides application sharing, desktop sharing, whiteboards, and polling. We're also going to provide Dialin conferencing support, which is kind of like an extension of audio conferencing, coming into our PSTN connections. One of the features that we're really excited to deploy at Rock Fitness is our audio-video conferencing. This allows for real-time audio and video conferencing without the need of any external services or providers. In the past, we've used a lot of products like Microsoft Live Meeting and other third-party products also. This is going to eliminate those costs. The Dialin conferencing feature is going to allow users to be able to dial up and gain access to the audio portion of a meeting coming across a PSTN line, whether they are authenticated corporate users or people that have been invited to meetings joining in anonymously. Although the Dialin conferencing doesn't require any third-party audio conferencing providers, it is going to require that we set up our mediation servers and define them in the gateways in our Topology builder. The web conferencing feature of Lync Server 2013 allows your clients to be able to use collaboration while they're in a conference. So while participating in a meeting, whether audio or audio and video, your clients can add collaboration into the meeting, such as document collaboration, application sharing, desktop sharing. They can also use whiteboards and polling. In order to provide more robust PowerPoint presentation sharing, Microsoft has also started to use Office Web Application Server to handle the sharing and the rendering of the PowerPoint presentations. For text-based communication with 3 or more parties, Microsoft Lync Server also supports instant messaging conferencing. And from inside of your IM conference, we can also add other forms or modalities of communication if it's required, such as audio or audio and video. Let's take a more in-depth look at the web conferencing features of Lync Server 2013. The web conferencing feature of Microsoft Lync Server 2013 provides the support for the collaboration of applications and documents, as well as desktop sharing, polling, and whiteboards. The web conferencing component runs on your front-end pool or on your standard edition server. So for clients inside of the organization, they have to be able to connect over to your front-end pool. For clients outside of the organization that are participating in our conferences, these clients have to connect in across our DMZ with our reverse proxy server and our edge services. When a client inside of the organization goes to join into a meeting, they click on a link with a URL, and it routes them over to the front-end pool, where they connect over to what's called a join launcher, which is an application component running in your front-end pool. And if your client has the Microsoft Lync Server 2013 client, the client's able to join into the meeting using the rich client. If they don't have the rich client, your client can join into the meeting using the web-based client, which now supports audio and video integration built right into it. For a client that is outside of the organization, when they go to join into a meeting and they click on the meeting's join URL, the external DNS will typically route that traffic through a reverse proxy server out in our DMZ. And the reverse proxy server can either route that traffic directly over to the front-end pool, or possibly through a director pool if we're using one. The edge server in our DMZ is going to provide 3 different services. We have the SIP service called the Access Edge service, which handles inbound and outbound SIP traffic. We also have the audio, video, and the web conferencing edge services also. We typically provide FQDN name to IP address mappings on our external DNS server, so that clients that are external to the environment have the ability to route over to the external interfaces on our edge server, or to the hardware load balancing appliance. So what exactly is a whiteboard? To me, a whiteboard kind of reminds me of a shared version of Microsoft Paint, in the sense that you have a blank canvas that all of the participants in the meeting can write on. You can draw, you can upload images. And any of the annotations made in the whiteboard are seen by all of the participants within your meeting. Another very useful feature that we have in conferencing is called polling. Polling allows the presenter to provide a question to the attendees of a meeting, and then they can select an option for their response, for example, A, B, C, or D. Polling encourages feedback and participation in a meeting. When the attendees respond to a poll question, the responses come in anonymously, and the presenter can choose if they want to show the results to the attendees or not. As a presenter participating in a web conference, you have the ability to choose from various types of sharing that are available to you. A presenter can share out their entire desktop, an individual monitor, or even just an application. So the attendees participating within the conference will be able to see the content that you're sharing out. A participant can also request taking control of your application or your desktop, and you can either allow or deny the request. Another area where Microsoft has made some significant changes to how Microsoft Lync conferencing works is with their PowerPoint sharing and presentations. Back with Microsoft Lync Server 2010, your Lync 2010 clients would typically view a PowerPoint slide deck using an embedded copy of a PowerPoint viewer, using a PowerPoint 97 to 2003 format. If clients connected into your meeting using the Lync web app, which is a web-based conferencing client, the PowerPoint presentation got converted over to dynamic HTML, and it was viewed using a combination of DHTML and Silverlight. Well, this introduced a couple of problems for us. Number one, not all of your clients support Microsoft Silverlight, including some of your more popular mobile clients. Also, some of your more robust features of PowerPoint weren't supported, such as animations, slide transitions, or embedded video. In order to address these issues, Microsoft is now using the Office Web App Server to handle the PowerPoint presentations for Lync Server 2013. Let's take a look at an overview of audio-video conferencing with Lync Server 2013. As we define our topology configuration for Microsoft Lync Server 2013, we have the ability to define which features we want to enable inside of our topology, such as web conferencing and, in this case, audio-video conferencing. Just because you enable audio-video conferencing inside of your topology within the Topology Builder, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of your users within your corporate environment can use these features. We have the ability to restrict who can use what features through our conferencing policies. We also have the ability to define how much bandwidth you have available through call admission control and bandwidth management. So for some of the executives at Covrock Fitness, we're going to allow them to use all of the features. They're going to be able to use the collaboration, app sharing and desktop sharing and all that, but we're also going to allow them to be able to use the audio and the video conferencing. For other users, we may restrict them just to audio, and we have some users that will be restricted so they can't use audio or video. You have to remember that the audio and video conferencing support is dependent upon the WAN, and it also requires that our users have some hardware to support it, like for example some audio and video devices. With your audio conferencing, Microsoft has several features that we can use to configure the experience for the presenter and the attendees. One of these features is called Audience Mute, and this allows a presenter to mute everybody in the audience, so the only active speaker will be the presenter. And if you've ever presented in a large meeting, you know that it seems like there's always one or two users that leave their microphones on. Well, this solves that problem. In an environment where you're using Dialin conferencing, a presenter can also turn on or off entry and exit announcements. This is a great feature for being able to minimize distractions, especially for very large conferences where people are joining in after the start time for the conference. One of the new features that we have with Lync Server 2013 is having the ability to add a user by dialing out. And what this does is allow a person with the necessary level of permissions, such as a presenter, the ability to add PSTN numbers to your conference and have the conference dial out to those numbers. It allows your Microsoft Lync server to dial out to another number instead of having the call coming inbound. One of the areas where Microsoft has added a lot of new value to the Lync server product is in the area of video conferencing. With the prior version of Lync server, we had a feature called panoramic video, and this allowed us to use what are called roundtable compatible devices, which allow you to have a full 360-degree view of a conference room. Well, we still have the ability to use panoramic video, but Microsoft has added some brand new features in with the product. One of the new features is called gallery view. With your gallery view feature, we now have the ability to see all of the users participating in a conference. If your conference has more than 5 participants, we start to see the most active participants in the top row, and we see the photos for the other participants. We have another feature called presenter-only video mode, where we present the video of only the presenter. We have another feature called video spotlight, and this allows a presenter to highlight a video feed of one of the participants in a conference. And one of the other features that I'm really fond of is we now have high definition video for conferencing, full 1080p. Before we go through our hands-on demonstration, let's take a high-level look at the Dialin conferencing provided by Lync Server 2013. Dialin conferencing is an optional feature provided with Lync Server 2013, and it allows users to participate in a conference by dialing in through a PSTN line to gain access to the audio portion of your conference. In order to use Dialin conferencing, it requires that we set up the infrastructure for enterprise voice. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you have to be using enterprise voice. Your users could still be using another voice over IP solution, but it does require the infrastructure defined inside of your topology builder, such as defining your mediation servers and your gateways. Through the use of the conferencing policies, an administrator can control if a user has the ability to schedule Dialin conferences. And if you do schedule a conference, when you send off your meeting request, it's going to include several bits of information that are required. First of all, we have an alphanumeric identifier for the conference. It also will send along with it information in regards to the numbers that you can dial to gain access to your conference. We call those PSTN access numbers that are linked to your Dialin conferencing regions. The meeting request will also have a link to the Dialin conferencing settings webpage. And when you click on that link, it brings you to a webpage that runs on your front-end pool, and that webpage allows you to see other numbers that you can use to dial into the conferences. It allows you to see the regions that are associated with them, and also the corresponding languages. That webpage can also be used for your PIN administration for your enterprise voice-enabled users. In order to use the feature of Dialin conferencing for your meetings that you schedule, the policy settings for your conferencing policy have to be defined as a presenter setting inside of your conferencing policy. So in short, in order for you to set up a meeting that's going to allow Dialin conferencing, it has to be enabled on your conferencing policy at the presenter level. When a user dials into the conference coming in through a PSTN line, the users fall into two separate categories. We have enterprise users and we also have anonymous users. Somebody that doesn't work for your organization would typically be an anonymous user, even if they work for a company that has a federation relationship with our organization. An enterprise user is a person that has an Active Directory account, in our case inside of CovRock Fitness, but the user also has to be enabled inside of the Lync server environment. When an enterprise user goes to join into the conference coming in through a PSTN line, they provide the information in regards to the conference that they want to join with a conference ID, and then they can choose to authenticate by providing a telephone number or an extension and a PIN. Now, depending upon how a meeting was scheduled, the users may be able to get directly into the meeting, or they may have to wait in a lobby until they're allowed in by a presenter. With an anonymous user, the experience for dialing into a conference is slightly different, because these users don't have the ability to authenticate. So they're typically prompted for the conference that they're going to join, and then because they're a non-authenticated user, they're prompted to record their name. So the recorded name of an unauthenticated user is used to identify that person inside of the meeting. Keep in mind that if you're an enterprise user who chooses not to enter your phone number and PIN, or chooses not to authenticate, you would also be prompted to record your name and treat it as an anonymous user also. The Microsoft Lync Server 2013 administrator has the ability to define default settings for your meetings. But as an end user, when you go to schedule a meeting, you can define the meeting's levels of access. For example, who can get into the meeting directly without waiting in the lobby, and who can function in the capacity of a presenter. Don't worry about the details of that right now. We're going to see a demonstration on this in just a couple of minutes. In order to support Dialin conferencing, it requires that we have some form of PSTN connectivity. So whether we have a run-of-the-mill PSTN connection or maybe we're using SIP trunks, but keep in mind, we also have to be able to support the number of concurrent connections. So when we look at the planning for the bandwidth usage and the number of concurrent calls across a link, we have to take into consideration the number of people dialing into our conferences also. But at a minimum, in order to use Dialin conferencing, we have to define at least one mediation server and at least one PSTN gateway. The mediation server can be co-located on your front-end server, or it could also be a dedicated mediation server. In this next demonstration, we're going to see how to configure the Lync server topology for conferencing. We're also going to take a tour of some of the settings that are configurable coming in through our control panel and through the Lync server management shell. Let's take a look at the configuration. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at a lot of the configurations that we have that go along with setting up our conferencing. I've just switched over to my Microsoft Lync server, and we're going to start this demonstration off by opening up our Topology builder. So on the Microsoft Lync server here, we're going to open up our Topology builder. We're going to download our topology from the existing deployment. Next, we're prompted for the name for our topology file. So here I'm going to give my topology a name. So as I work inside of the topology builder, I'll be working off of a local XML file. And then when I'm done making the changes to my topology, I'll publish those changes back to the central management store. So to start off this demonstration, let's open up our Lync server directory structure. And you can see that I have a couple of sites, one for Scottsdale and one for Phoenix. Well, let's start off by opening up the properties for Lync server. And here I'm going to edit my properties. My default zip domain is set to covrockfitness.com. But if I scroll down to my simple URLs, I have my phone access URL, which is what we call our Dialin simple URL. I've got my meeting simple URL, and I also have my administrative access URL, which is used for gaining access to the administration console, the control panel. For clients inside of the organization, the dialin.covrockfitness.com phone access URL will either route the clients directly over to the front-end pool or to a director pool if you're using a director. For clients outside of the organization, the dialin.covrockfitness.com DNS entry, host record, would route the clients through a reverse proxy server. And the reverse proxy server can either route the traffic directly over to a front-end pool or through a director pool. Underneath that, we have our meeting simple URL, and this is used to comprise the URLs used to join into meetings. So if I were to set up a meeting right now, you would actually see a meeting request going out that would look something like https://meet.covrockfitness.com/user-alias/conference ID. You have to have one meet simple URL per each SIP domain that you're supporting. For clients inside of the organization, DNS can route this traffic directly over to your front-end pool or through a director pool first. For clients outside of the organization, the meet simple URL would typically route through our reverse proxy server out in the DMZ. So your external DNS would have to point over to the reverse proxy for this. Let's close out of this console. Next, we're going to go down to our site called Scottsdale. And if I right-click and I go to Edit the Properties for Scottsdale, you can see that I have a setting here for call admission control. One of the concerns we had at Covrock Fitness was that real-time audio and video would use up too much bandwidth on our network. Here's where I can specify that I want to enable call admission control, and then you specify the front-end pool to run the call admission control or the network policy services. So here, each site is going to have a pool which will be running the network policy services to control your bandwidth. And here, mine's going to run on pool.covrockfitness.com in my site called Scottsdale. As we scroll down a little further, now you can see that we can define our site federation route assignment. When we're communicating with clients out on the internet, we typically define what are called federated routes for certain types of traffic. Well, here you can see that I can select my director or edge pool as my federated route. I can define my SIP federation route and also my XMPP federation route. So in my case, once I have my edge server set up, I would have my SIP federation traffic going through the Access Edge service out in your DMZ. I'd point to my edge servers. For the XMPP federation, Lync Server 2013 now has native support for XMPP, with an XMPP proxy out on your edge servers and an XMPP gateway integrated into your front-end servers as a service. With Microsoft Lync Server 2010, the prior version of Lync Server, we had to get a separate XMPP gateway, which was provided on the OCS Office Communication Server 2007 R2 Media. With Lync Server 2013, Microsoft has built it into the product. You just have to define this in your topology. Let's close out of this console. Next, we're going to go down to our Lync Server 2013. We'll open up our Enterprise Edition pool. And for this demo, we're going to look at our pool called pool.covrockfitness.com. We'll right-click, open up the properties for it. You'll notice at the top of the console that I have features and functionality, and it reads instant messaging and presence are always enabled. Select the additional features that this pool should be able to handle. Well, we have conferencing, which includes audio, video, and application sharing. So again, that's an important point. When you enable conferencing, you're enabling audio, video, and app sharing, or that collaboration. We also have the ability to configure PSTN conferencing. So this is where you would enable it inside of your topology, and you can also define if you want to enable enterprise voice. Let's scroll down a little further. Next, you can see underneath where I have my file store. You'll notice that there's a little selection box that says Associate the pool with an Office Web Apps server. The Office Web Apps server is not specific to Microsoft Lync. It can also be used with integration with other products such as SharePoint. I already have an Office Web Apps server set up, so what I'm going to do here is click on New. Here I provide the name of my Office Web Apps server. You'll notice that as I provide the FQDN, the system automatically populates the URL used to connect over to it down below. Mine is called WAC. It's my Web Application Server, crf01.carverockfitness.com. Here, my Office Web App Server is deployed internally, so I'm going to click on OK. We now have an Office Web App Server to run our PowerPoint presentations. To deploy the Office Web App Server, you can download the product from the Microsoft download site. On the server itself, you typically install a certificate used for secure communication. Once you have a web server certificate installed onto your Office Web Apps server, you would then typically deploy the Office Web Apps product. Once you have the Office Web Apps server installed, you then have to go in through the PowerShell, and you would create an Office Web Apps server farm. And again, this is done through the command line. So what you would normally do on that server is import the module called Office Web Apps inside of your PowerShell, and that gives you access to the command line support. Then you can use the new -Office Web Apps farm commandlet to create a URL structure used for your apps farm. And this is where we can associate the front-end pool with an edge pool for media streaming or media component traffic, which is used in our conferencing. Let's scroll down a little further. At the bottom of the console, you can see where I have my mediation server co-located on my front-end pool. Now, this is going to be required for my Dialin conferencing. As you remember, we have to have a mediation server in our gateways defined. Well, here, I've got my mediation server configured, and you can see that I'm servicing traffic over port 5067 for TLS and port 5068 for non-secure TCP traffic. I've also got a defined trunk configured for my gateway. Let's click on OK. When you're done defining your topology settings, we have to publish our topology. So what I would do here is right-click, publish my topology, and we just sit back and wait for that topology to get pushed back into CMS, the Central Management Store. Here you can see that I've published my topology successfully. We're going to click on Finish, and then we're going to close out of our topology builder. For the next demonstration, let's take a look at our control panel. Inside of the Microsoft Lync Server control panel, I have to authenticate. So here I'm going to log in as administrator. We'll put in our password. Once I've logged into the control panel, I want to start off this demonstration by going up to voice routing. Inside of my dial plans, you'll notice that I have a dial plan for Mesa, one for Phoenix, and one for Scottsdale. Well, let's start off with our Scottsdale dial plan. We know that dial plans control the rules for normalization of numbers that you dial. So when you dial a number, the number gets translated over to that E.164 format. You can see that within your dial plans, we have our Dialin conferencing regions. Dialin conferencing regions are associated with Dialin conferencing numbers. So when you send off a meeting request, the first 3 telephone numbers assigned or associated with your conferencing region will get passed along with the meeting request. For the Scottsdale dial plan, I'm going to provide a conferencing region of Scottsdale. And then we'll click on OK. And for the dial plan for Phoenix, we'll provide a dial-in conferencing region of Phoenix. Now for each of these conferencing regions, we're going to have dial-in numbers that are local to each of them. Once I've made my changes, we're going to commit them, and then click on OK. We're going to see the dial-in conferencing regions come into play when we set up our dial-in conferencing numbers. But for now, let's go down to our conferencing tab. And here you can see that I have conferencing policy, meeting configuration, dial-in access number, and PIN policy tabs. Let's start off with our conferencing policy. When you set up your conferencing policies, you can apply the settings here globally. You can also apply your conferencing policy settings at the site or right down to the user level. So for example, if I define a site policy for Scottsdale, you can see that I've got the name of my site, Scottsdale. You've got a description, which is optional. And then you have the organizer and the participant policy. So settings that pertain to the organizer or the participants in a meeting. The maximum meeting size specifies the maximum number of participants that are allowed in a meeting. Keep in mind that a Lync server can host more than one meeting, and your meetings get dispersed amongst the different servers within a pool, meaning that not all of the meetings run on the same server. The next option, do I want to allow meeting organizers to be able to invite unauthenticated users to the meeting? The next option is underneath recordings. Do I want to allow presenters or attendees to be able to record the meeting? We can also allow external and unauthenticated participants to be able to record the meeting. You have to keep in mind that security is a major issue for some companies. If you have a meeting and somebody records it, they then have access to that recording and they can do whatever they want with it. As we look down below, we have an option for audio and video. As we had mentioned, just because you enable audio and video conferencing, it doesn't mean that everybody can use it. Here you'll notice that through the policies, we can specify if we want to enable IP audio or video. We can also restrict it to just audio, or we can lock it down altogether. We're going to keep ours enabled. Let's scroll down a little further. As we look down below, you see that we have an option for enabling PSTN dial-in conferencing. This is going to allow users to be able to dial into a meeting coming in through a PSTN connection. We also have a feature that allows anonymous participants to be able to dial out. So an unauthenticated user can actually join the meeting by using a dial-out phone number. So the conferencing server calls the user and the user answers the phone to join into the meeting. A nice user-friendly feature. We also have some very important options down below under data collaboration. Do you want to enable data collaboration with your meetings? Now, this falls into the category of what we call web conferencing. And as you can see, we can also disable certain functionality. So for example, do I want to allow federated and anonymous participants to be able to download content? Do I want to allow participants to be able to transfer files? Do we want to allow users to provide annotations? Do I want to enable PowerPoint annotations? And do I want to enable polling? We can shut down all of this. Let's scroll down a little bit further. Next, you see that we have an option for application sharing. Do I want to enable app sharing or do I want to disable it? Do I want to allow participants to be able to take control? And we can also allow federated and anonymous participants to be able to take control. You'll notice that Microsoft now kind of groups the federated and anonymous users together. So if you come from an OCS environment, the federated users had a higher level of access. Well, they're now treated like anonymous users. At the bottom of the console, we have our participant policy. Do I want to enable application and desktop sharing? And as you notice, we can disable that. So this allows users to schedule meetings that support app sharing and desktop sharing, or we can further restrict that if we choose to. We can also allow participants to be able to perform peer-to-peer file transfers during a meeting. We can also allow participants to be able to record peer-to-peer conferencing sessions. Let's commit those changes, and then we'll go over to our meeting configuration tab. With your meeting configurations, we have the ability to define the policy settings globally, or you can define a policy at the site or even down to the pool level. So once again, I'm going to create a policy for Scottsdale, and from inside of the console, you can see the properties that we have available to us. Now you have to remember that when you're applying your policies, pool level policies would have the highest level of precedence. If you don't have a pool level policy, the next level would be site, and then global would be kind of like your catch-all. So what are some of the options that we have here? Well, number one, when a PSTN caller dials into a meeting, can they bypass the lobby? The lobby is a feature that came out with Lync Server 2010. So when a user dials into the meeting, if they're not able to get into the meeting directly, they could sit in the lobby, which is kind of like a hold state where they can listen to a little bit of music until a presenter allows them into the meeting. We can also define who by default will be designated as a presenter. Authenticated users or possibly anybody. So when we look at these three choices that we have, you have company, which is authenticated users, everybody, including unauthenticated users, and none, which means only the organizer would be a presenter. There's another option to have the organizer select a conference type when scheduling a meeting. We also have a selection box next to assigned conference type by default. This allows us to define the default conference type or the settings, but the organizer can override this and they can define their own settings if they choose to for the levels of access for the conference. If you want to prevent anonymous users from being automatically admitted into a conference, we can clear the Admit Anonymous Users by Default checkbox. At the bottom of the console, you can see that there's a couple of new features that have been added in. From within inside of the control panel, we can provide a URL for a logo, for help, and also for legal text. We can also provide the text that can be provided for a custom footer that goes along with the meeting request. Here, let's click on Commit. On the Dialin Access Number tab, this is where we define the numbers that can be used for dialing in to gain access to the audio portion of a conference. So as an example, if I click on New, we'll start to create the new Dialin access number by defining the display number, and then we'll create the display name. And here now we define the display name. Underneath that we define our line URI. And then we'll provide our SIP URI. We'll specify the pool that will be handling the call. We define our primary language. Here, we're going to use English US. When a user dials into a dial-in access number, we can define a single primary language and up to 4 secondary languages. These are used for the audio prompts. So when a user dials in, they're prompted for the language that they want to use. At the bottom of the console, this is where we define the associated region that is defined inside of our dial plans. So in this case, we're going to associate this with a dial plan region called Scottsdale. My dial plan for Scottsdale is associated with a region called Scottsdale. It's a dial-in conferencing region. We'll click on OK. And it looks like we have our dial-in conferencing number. And let's test this out and see what it looks like. I'm going into my Internet Explorer. We're going to click on the link that connects us over to our Dialin conferencing webpage. If you remember, that's my simple URL, dialin.carverockfitness.com. And as you can see down below, I have my personal identification number PIN management link. You have your conferencing dial-in numbers, and you can see that new number that I just provided, Scottsdale. I have my languages. And then further down below, you can see what we have for our configured DTMF controls. So here you have *6 if you want to mute or unmute your microphone in a meeting. You can toggle audience mute if you're the presenter. You can lock or unlock the conference. The feature that I like here, *1, it gives you a description of the available commands. We also have a feature called roll call, so if you want to privately play the name of each participant in the conference. And we can also unlock the lobby with *8. Keep in mind that the DTMF controls, they can be modified. Let's close out of the web browser. On our next tab, we have our PIN policy. And your PIN policies can be applied globally, but we can also apply them at the user or the site level. So the highest precedence would be user level. So if you don't have a user level policy, you would then try to get a site policy. If you don't have one there, then you would get the global settings. Let's open that up. And here you can see that I can define a minimum PIN length, and it defaults to 5. We can specify the maximum number of logon attempts, which is not defined by default. We can define a PIN expiration, so pins are only valid for so many days, which again is not defined by default. You have a PIN history count. PIN history count means that you have to change your PIN so many times before you can use that same PIN over and over again. We can also specify if we want to allow common patterns, and that is not enabled by default. It prevents users from using very simple PINs like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or parts of your telephone number. Okay, let's close out of there. Once you've enabled your dial-in conferencing, the next logical step would be to verify that it's working the way that it's supposed to be. Because when a call comes into one of your dial-in conferencing numbers and it gets routed into your Lync environment, that call should get handled by your conferencing auto attendant. So in order to test this out coming in through the command line, we're going to open up the Lync server management shell, and we're going to see a test-cs dial-in conferencing commandlet. There's a couple of commandlets that we can use for verifying our credentials. And the first commandlet we're going to use will provide our credentials to the system so that we can retrieve them later on in another commandlet. So here, whenever I use $cred in the future for other commandlets inside of the shell, that is going to get substituted in with the get-credential. Here, let's provide my credentials. And then we'll put in our password. Then we'll click on OK. The second commandlet is the test-cs dial-in conferencing. And when I test my Dialin conferencing, I have to provide a user SIP address. And my user SIP address is going to be sip://smcassie@carvrockfitness.com. You then specify our credentials. And then finally we put in the target pool. And here you'll see that that's identified by a target FQDN, and ours is pool.carvrockfitness.com. And then we'll hit enter to test the Dialin conferencing. And what you should see here is either a success or failure. And the key point here is that if you see a result that shows up as a failure, such as I have, well, it gives you a little bit of information. You've got an error message down below. My error message states that the logon was denied and that I should check that the proper credentials are used and that the account is still active. But the key point is that it gives me an error message. Keep in mind that if I had just set this up, you may also want to restart your front-end services running on your front-end server. Let's close out of here. We'll close out of the control panel. I hope you've enjoyed the video on conferencing with Microsoft Lync Server 2013, and we'll see you in the next video.